The fact that we gather together with intention to explore our experiences in terms of sexual health, such a potent and powerful space that was created. The work that I do really starts with the belief that lived experience is invaluable. And this is becoming a very trendy word now, lived experience. But what does lived experience really mean? How can we really enable the lived experience to help us understand why, for example, as in this project, women of African heritage communities in the UK, which is mainly who we deal with, are not accessing the services from the Terrence Higgins Trust. We know that HIV is impacting this particular demographic. So these were the foundations of this collaboration.
HIV is still with us and many people don't know that, and so late diagnoses, which means people are being diagnosed once they've been living with HIV for a long time, is still problematic in the UK. So that's one of the goals of the Terrence Higgins Trust, is to make sure that everybody tests, everybody knows their status, and if testing positive, start their treatment as soon as possible. And what we realised is that our literature and our campaigns, perhaps it isn't reaching everybody it needs to reach. So that's when we started thinking, okay, let's design something together, deliver something together that's actually going to speak to people in a very real way because it's coming from them.
We sat together, worked with the women's group and said, okay, this is the situation. How do we break those barriers so that there's higher uptake of the services, that the information that we're spreading, these are some of the questions we needed to explore and research. In doing participatory work, I think it's also important to remember that it's not something we're used to. We're used to being researched as communities. Come in or fill out a form. Why aren't African heritage communities accessing 1, 2, 3? Fill out a form and we go. The qualitative research that really helps us understand motivations, the things that you can't see just from the outside or that will not come up in one session. This is what we've had the opportunity to do in this project, because from the very beginning, the premise was that we have to build trust to be able to get to really meaningful change, to enable the videos that we're making, to enable authentic expression. How do we do that when there's no trust?
We've started off with focus groups, going into women's groups and talking about the project and giving people the opportunity to come and tell their story. We picked out key themes that seemed to be mentioned across all focus groups, and we went back to them with that information saying, this is what we found, these seem to be the common themes, does everyone agree with that? And that opened up more discussion again, didn't it?
In between, always coming back, working with the women's group from AFiUK and saying, this is where we are in the project, this is what's happened so far, this is where we're going, and this is why we want it.
We kind of took their feedback on board and we went and had a discussion about what these videos would look like. Way back at the beginning, no one wanted to be in the videos, so we were talking about hiring in actresses and making scripts. The whole sense changed, the whole feeling behind the project, and it felt like it was more owned by the women. They were coming forward, we want to speak our own words. I want to be involved, I want to be seen, I want to break the stigma. I want to change the way this issue is talked about.
And as soon as the space is opened up, well, there's nothing else to be done because the conversation flows. Those focus groups were a riot. They were a riot. There were so many discoveries. The female condom. Most of us, myself included, had never seen this female condom. And when it was opened, well, let me tell you, complete riot. What we've seen emerging, we've seen women saying, I want to know more about this. I want to go into my communities. I want to take this information back home. We didn't know about the medication.
I thought it was a thing of the past. So I could have contracted it not thinking of protect yourself with HIV or whatever. Yeah.
It wasn't something
I could have been a statistic.
And we've seen as we've been filming that the journey from where we all were when we did the focus groups to where we are now in terms of information, education, confidence, agency in speaking openly and publicly about sexual health matters, I mean, I think gulfs have been crossed, really.
And I think when you work with people in a more open way, and it's not about information giving, and it's not a presentation or educate, it's a conversation. And when you have a conversation, I think stories come out, you very naturally come up on certain topics like the medication for HIV. It's not kind of going in, dumping all the information and leaving it.
I think, yeah, that's definitely true. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that that was enabled by having myself and Nicole with us.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that we could build the bridge. So we were at once part of the group, but also the bridge to THT.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally about trust, you know. And it's also important to remember when you're dealing with communities that are underserved, less seen, less heard in everyday life, there is an inherent distrust, and you can understand why. We have shared stories in confidence because that basis of trust is there about our early experiences with HIV and AIDS, you know, which was ravaging Africa at the time. One sister shared how suddenly their family of 5, I think, became a family of 12 because it was either aunts or uncles who both passed away, and therefore the children came to live in the homestead. And I recall that the sister who was sharing was saying there was just so much trauma around HIV/AIDS, confusion and stigma, you know, cultural stigma. We addressed these really difficult to reach questions in this project, and it was achieved in a way that has been liberating.
Because historically, in the UK, HIV, the history of HIV is often talked about in a UK context. And many of the women in this group, like you were saying before, their formative years would have been in other countries, and yet that trauma, that experience might not be acknowledged in the same way.
Absolutely true. There's so much that's unseen and that could never have been unearthed, even for the participants themselves, without this safe space that was created and this gentle journey of unfolding into a new awareness of self, a new relationship, I believe, between ourselves and how we can talk about our sexual health.
Some people also found it hard to go and test themselves because they will say, what if people see me going there? What people will be thinking? Don't think what people thinking. Do right thing for yourself. Go and test.
The cultural dimension can be expressed in so many ways. So many women shared stories of when they first menstruated, and it was assigned to a culture. In our culture, we do this, or we don't do X. I am one of 2 wives, so we come from a polygamous culture, a culture that practices polygamy. And I'm married, therefore I'm fine. And then other women would say, what do you mean you're fine? You might be fine, but where's he gone? So this is where it became very, you know, on occasion quite riotous. But there were lots of light bulb moments like that. The fact that we gather together with intention to explore our experiences in terms of sexual health, such a potent and powerful space that was created. And so these cultural shifts, I think there's more work to be done about understanding this. And perhaps that's another project that we can unfold into.
And I think this is going to have a nice snowball effect as well, because
Yes.
I think, as you were saying, if you've never had those conversations before, you might not bring them up. But whereas all the women who've taken part in this project might go to their friends, their family, and talk about what they're doing, and then that creates new spaces where those conversations can continue.
I know for a fact it's happening. I've definitely been talking to people and saying, oh my gosh, did you know?
Actually, I had a message from one of the ladies, and they said, I'm chatting with somebody back home and I want to tell them this, and I just want to check I'm giving the right information.
So here we have a project that has some very tangible outcomes, because again, you know, this is a group of women, they're in lots of networks, their connections to back home, wherever back home is. And Also, many of the sisters have said they want to become educators, community champions, the Terrence. So there's ongoing opportunity that has emerged here. And these are things that you could never foresee. Yeah, you could never foresee.